No, thank you, Nikunj. Thank you, Sonal, for this. It's nice to join an event where it starts earlier than time. So I think that's a great start to start with. But thank you for this great thing. I think the topic is also very, very relevant. So thank you everybody for joining. I think data privacy is very, very topical. In fact, I was just speaking to some client which has a CCI issue. And they're all discussing about data, what data can the regulator take, what data is available, is there any privilege getting a law firm in India, what are the rules, can you protect personal information, some bit of the company's operations are cross-border outside India, so the question is that data protected? So there's so many technical questions around data today and data privacy that I think that's going to be really, really topical for today's session and hope you enjoy it. So I'll go right into it. I mean, just a quick intro. I'm a partner at EY. I head the forensic practice for India and the emerging markets. I also sit on the global markets board, and I'm a CA and lawyer like most of us on this panel. No fun thing, just the same old. But just to quickly get into the panel, so my first question to Sonal, actually, just to get right into it. So, the proposed personal data protection bill, it sets up to basically create a comprehensive overhaul of India's current data protection policies. So maybe you can just kick off, Sonal, and talk about some of the key features that you see in the bill and your views on it. And we'll just
Sure. Thanks, Arpinder. So I guess we've been seeing a lot of traction in the privacy regime in India, which is a good thing. We still have a long way to go, is what I would say. But I guess with the latest iteration that we have on PDP, which is now going to be called the Data Protection Bill, because I think we've expanded the scope to include non-personal data as well, is quite a significant development, I would say, because it imposes a lot more obligations on the organizations from a compliance standpoint. But some of the key features or salient features of data protection bill are it's the data of person is classified into personal data, sensitive personal data, and critical personal data. Of course, we are awaiting a lot of clarifications once the law is enacted and the rules are made available from a guidance standpoint on critical personal data. The primary basis of processing, of course, is consent, as we all know, and that's where I guess we have a bit of a difference in comparison with GDPR. Data fiduciaries are required to process personal data, of minors in a manner that protects the rights and are in the best interest of the child. And of course, there are a lot of compliances vis-a-vis that. There are a lot of other obligations, and there's a laundry list of obligations. But if you look at the obligations on significant data fiduciary, right? They need to have a privacy by design policy. Data protection officer needs to be designated. They need to register with the DPA as and when that happens. You're expected to maintain the the entire records of processing. So it's important for you to have the data lifecycle management tool. You need to do the data protection impact assessment. So the list goes on and on and on. But I guess to answer your question, Arpinder, there are a lot of obligations on the companies, and if they've not started their data privacy journey, then I would say that you please start. Even if you replicate GDPR model, you would be 75-80% odd, ready in terms of your compliance journey. And then, of course, you can keep investing on the other nuances as and when we have the law in place.
I think, Sonal, that's a very well put, especially about your point that why don't we just start the journey? Because 60, 70, or 75%, however you put the percentage, is fairly similar. So at least start. The guidelines are there because once it hits you, you won't have much time. And it's better you create your technology, your systems in a robust manner which can deal with it. I think very well put. Nikunj, quick question to you. So how do you strike a balance between the imperatives of privacy protection and ensure innovation and productivity growth? Because obviously there's a thin balance between business and data privacy and lawyers becoming contentious to growth. And so your view on how to balance it.
Yeah, so very good question, Arpinder. I think because when let's say India started taking steps toward comprehensive data protection law, many have projected that time that excessive focus on privacy will stall the growth of Indian economy. Yeah. I think it's slightly differently, positioning privacy regulation as an impediment of data driven innovation fundamentally misinterprets the notion of basic privacy. Yeah. Privacy actually engenders trust and is therefore key to unlocking meaningful innovation. Any thoughtful regulation that enhances trust will definitely redirect innovation towards privacy protecting practices. And a lot of innovation in today's digital economy is driven by access to high quality data. This is a trend that we see in sectors ranging from healthcare to finance, and from gig economy to government services. So informational privacy doesn't mean curtailment of access to personal data. Instead, it provides complete control to individual about how personal data is used. This means that one should know what data is collected and who holds it, how long they have it, and how it is used. And privacy also means providing inalienable rights over personal data. The right to access, rectify, or recall information, right to be forgotten, to data portability, and to objective processing, among others. So technological gains should not come at the expense of privacy. Privacy is fundamental and inalienable right. Regulation should not try to balance innovation and privacy, but instead promote appropriate innovation that is based on a respect for privacy and user control. As long as we create that kind of a legal framework for privacy, which is predictable, context dependent, nimble and fair, there is no reason to believe that regulation will impede innovation. In fact, trust will create the right environment for greater participation in digital economy, thus strengthening businesses and innovators. So that's how I take this as a topic. Coming to this bill, obviously, as Sonal rightly mentioned, right, it's much delayed and much needed legislation here that will replace our existing data protection regime in India as compared to current standards. Obviously, it will help protect privacy rights of individuals and promote fair and transparent use of data for innovation and growth, and thereby unlocking the digital economy. That's how I see this.
Oh, I think that's very well put, Nikunj, because I can tell you when I go to a retail store to buy anything today, they ask you for your phone number. They don't read out the rights to you, and you don't think it's optional. In fact, sometimes the store says, "Sir, I can't process your discount unless you give me your phone number and email ID." So sometimes you're like shocked, you can't process my discount because of this. So, and some of the stores actually rebut your sales. So it's quite rampant, and I think some level of education at the country level is required to say that these are our rights as citizens, and we are not forced to give our information out publicly at every time. So Sonal, coming back to you, so how do companies, as you correctly started, look at 75-80% of it, you can start with GDPR. Let's get into a little bit more details. What are some of the baby steps a company can start? Let's say you have global companies like Nikunj's, where there's already a lot of work happening internationally, and you can take some of that great work and work off it. But if you're an Indian company and you're one, if I can pick up that, how do you start the journey? What are some 4-5 recommendations, baby steps, and how do they manage this with government intervention? So just some detailing for the team on this panel.
Sure. It's an interesting space actually, and I'm very fascinated. I've been with the industry for nearly 2 decades now, and there's so much happening in the industry, right? We are in the world of a digital economy. We are in this universal digital world of metaverse. So earlier there was not much awareness in terms of handling of data because there was no commercial benefit, and a lot of organizations have AI related offerings vis-a-vis to understand the consumer behavior, etc. in B2C space, right? So given that there's so much of data around us, given that a lot of data is getting processed, a lot of data is getting analyzed, a lot of commercial benefits are derived, it's important for companies who are in that business to respect, and as Nikunj said, respect that trust, have that trust element established very well, and basis that have a framework around it. So the best thing that an organization could do is have a data privacy framework. And what does that entail? To start with, you need to have policy, because policy would define the do's and don'ts of what you could do, the contours of how you would want to operate vis-a-vis usage of data. You need to have good technical and organizational measures, right? Are you processing data on a lawful basis is something that you need to understand. How about the data retention and disposal policy? I mean, data minimization is extremely important. And today, if we collect the data, personal data or SPI, for a specified purpose, if the purpose is or, do you really intend to keep that data forever? If the answer is yes, then there's a big problem, right? What do you have you even if you don't have law as yet in the country, but have you thought of a data protection officer who would focus on governance around data processing, and your role as a data controller or a data processor, right? It's important to establish a DPO office so that you can monitor the compliances vis-a-vis the policies. How are your ISMS guidelines? How do you go about creating that awareness and training? Do you have robust training material? How is your incident management procedure? You can't be reactive in these matters. And look at the penalty regime across the globe, and look at the quantum of penalties which are getting imposed. You cannot take data privacy lightly anymore. So it's important to have data subject rights management procedure established, to have the data privacy framework established with all these elements which I've just highlighted, because that would put the company on the right path in terms of establishing that trust with the data subject, driving that culture, privacy culture, because as I mentioned earlier, you cannot be reactive when there's an incident. So let's not wait for the incidents, and let's just focus on risk mitigation and respect the data subjects' rights. That's my view.
So Sonal, I think that's very well put. I think that is very important. In fact, one client asked us, how do you identify critical data in the organization? Because even that's a challenge, right? One policy you can start with, but then what is the means of identifying the data across your disjointed system sometimes to say where is the private information? If tomorrow someone says right to be forgotten, as Nikunj said, how do you get forgotten, right? I mean, you have to first get the data. You don't even know where it is sometimes. So I think interesting challenges. Nikunj, coming to you, I mean, Sonal said that, about risk mitigation. So do you want to talk about some best practice around risk mitigation, which maybe your organization has done, and your view on risk mitigation to start with, maybe?
So, I mean, I'll start with, where you left actually. Yeah. So this is about knowing the data, the scoping of data. First of all, when somebody want to start, this is the first step. First of all, to know what kind of data your business actually processes, right, or gets it and unstores it from time to time. So I think that's the first step according to me, because and so far many, let's say, multinational companies, from their experience from foreign jurisdiction, and even the local companies, in anticipation of data privacy law, they have started preparing themselves to ask this question, that, what kind of data do we have, and how are we maintaining these records? And the second is about the data protection impact assessment. Now, companies definitely need to have, the data protection impact assessment for any new processing or changes to the processing deemed to represent this high risk to privacy. The third element I would put it is privacy by design, which law explicitly mentioned that there has to be the case. Yeah. So this law basically requires, privacy and data protection controls to be incorporated by design into any new or existing system or processes, and that involve resident personal data. Now, this is easier said than done, because when we say privacy by design, it actually requires a complete overhaul of the IT landscape or the system which companies are using. Yeah. So that's a big exercise, and I think that I mean, we can tell you from our experience, of GDPR at a global level, 24 months is definitely not enough for that. Yeah, so it needs more time, and therefore I think companies need to start asking this question to themselves. Coming to the other topic which you highlighted, security for privacy. Now, this is something which we discussed in our first session as well, as Devdas mentioned. Now, this current hybrid working environment, we have this lot of instances of cyber security leaks and the data leaks as well. Now, we have been taking it the way it was coming, and then companies now have been dealing it this way or the other. And I'm not here to comment it was right or wrong, because that's gray area. But having said that, now the new law clearly requires this data leaks to be reported to this DPA. Now, this calls for, again, within the organization, complete knowledge as well as system to know that data has been first of all leaked, and then you go ahead and report it. Lastly, it's not just about or your own data management practices. Organizations can even be held liable for personal data in the hands of business partner as well, and this definitely requires organizations monitor the risk associated with sharing personal data, including mitigating those risks, as Sonal rightly mentioned, and the security assessment, right? So having said that, these steps, as we discussed earlier, should be an organizational wide activity, and privacy has to be designed based on the risk identified and mitigation of those risks. That's how I see this.
Right. No, I think it's a very good point you mentioned about third parties, Nikunj. I think that is a risk I see more so in India, because a lot of things outsourced, right? From security to IT infrastructure to consultants like us who may have data. So I think that's important. It's becoming more critical. In fact, I'm getting so many clients who are telling me after the project is over, formally they send me an email saying delete all our information, and I have to confirm back to them. So I think that's becoming a more prevalent practice in that sense. But one question before I move back to Sonal, Nikunj, a slightly controversial one. Both of you are lawyers. Is a data protection officer supposed to be a lawyer, or can he be a technology person? Are there any best practices on that? I mean, I always hear lawyers talking about it, but it's a technical topic. Why is that?
Yeah, if I can take it, Sonal, maybe then you can add. Clearly, I think, see, what the draft bill demands and what we have seen, and I mean, so far, even from a global perspective as well, it's a combination of both. I mean, only not an IT person or IT professional can handle this job, and neither a lawyer who is a hardcore lawyer only can handle this job. It's an additional knowledge of IT landscape, how it works. Perhaps, according to me, is the combination of both. Now, if the question is whether we do have that kind of a ready workforce here to handle, that's a big question to answer. Yeah, but for me, this is the way I see this. Yeah, so combination of both is something companies should look at.
So thanks Nikunj for that. I feel that it's important for the data protection officer to have technical background, because it all relates to the technical nuances in terms of how do you handle the data, right? I mean, of course, lawyers have built that expertise over a period of time, but the data protection would have an army of lawyers to provide inputs where he or she would need inputs. But I think it's important for the data protection to have technical background. So if he is a qualified lawyer, I think that's the best combination, but he cannot be oblivious of the technical nuances, because when it comes to incident management, or even from the contour standpoint, technical expertise would definitely go a long way and would help.
Okay.
And if I can take one more moment and add to what Sonal has mentioned. So far, what we see, even in case of GDPR as well, is that even if someone has that position, having obviously the technical knowledge, as Sonal rightly mentioned, but when it drills down to the team, it's a combination of both. You need IT experts, but you also need lawyers as well. So that's where I think this background, but at the same time the clear experts as well in different fields helps.
No, I think well put by both of you. So it means that engineers plus law could be the future career for people.
Absolutely.
So coming back to this, Sonal, I think I think Nikunj slowly got into this whole topic of data lifecycle. So could you share your view on the data lifecycle? How is that managed for an organization like you? Because I know some of you, I mean, what I heard about 3, 4 years back when GDPR first started is the Indian IT companies got hammered first because, you had to sign these back-to-back contracts, kind of indemnifying any risk which you may have on the data. So I felt you all were in the hot seat, in India, and had to deal with signing all these contracts without really having the best process because it was just starting and you were being forced. So your thoughts on that and then data lifecycle.
Sure, sure. So you're right. Given that most of the IT companies process a lot of, critical data or maybe sensitive personal, information along with the PII, the expectation was that, the conversations from the client side changed, right, over a period of time. Earlier, they were not concerned about privacy at all or InfoSec elements at all, but eventually they started getting really stringent, and the expectation was, how do you go about it? What's your privacy culture in the organization? What are the processes? What are your technical measures? What are the organizational measures? So a lot of conversation around collection, access, use, deletion of data happened, and those conversations continue to happen, right? Do you have a data privacy framework was the question. Then how do you deal with our data? It's not about signing a data DPA or DTA or SCC. It's about you following it in letter and spirit, right? So you're right, a lot of questions vis-a-vis that, and of course a lot of compliance measures and investments in that domain did happen. But it's not about you being a processor, right? You're also a controller. When you collect the employees' information, right, you do have a lot of obligations and more stringent obligations as a controller. So even from that standpoint, I think it's important to revamp your privacy framework. It should be ever evolving or, dynamic document where you don't just implement it and forget about it, right? So you need to focus on data identification and classification. You need to have data loss prevention strategies, including full privacy by design architecture, which Nikunj mentioned. You need to have processes to avoid human error. It's difficult, but if you automate, if you have your data life cycle management automated, then I think the element of human error is minimal, right? So I think it's important to have I think my message to companies would be, please invest in data lifecycle management tools. Please invest in DLP tools. Have your DLP strategies identified. Focus on identification and classification. Start from the touch point to the end usage of the data. Focus. I mean, let's just take data privacy seriously is what I would say.
It's interesting you said that, Sonal. A lot of companies I find in India which have DLPs, they outsource the DLP to some advisory firm because they say it's not core to them. That's the first thing I see. The second thing I see is that it's again like email KYC. It's about the queries. It's about what you identify can be sent out, what should be flagged off, who should approve it. Like the manager, senior manager, etc. So obviously IT companies will be ahead of the curve, but normal companies in India, I find DLP is something, should they be taking more seriously than they have done in the past? Because they just say, oh, we have a DLP process. Some firm manages it. But actually, business puts so much pressure. They say you're curtailing it by restricting our interactions with third-party emails. So any views on that? Have you ever had any pressure from the business side to compromise some of your DLP requirements, and maybe Nikunj from your side also?
Nikunj, you want to go first or?
Yeah. So nothing specific. I think. See, I think as far as our organization is concerned, we have that advantage of having this, let's say, office in Germany, which means subjected to GDPR and all. And we see clearly the awareness within the organization that when we say that, when we have a discussion on that topic of whether we should do this or not, this is where obviously, as I said in my first question remarks, this is where comes the balance of both. Yeah. Protecting the data at the same time processing it in that is in line with the law. I have not come across that kind of a situation, or let's say the pressure wherein we thought about going other way around actually.
Yeah, same here. Luckily, touchwood, my business is quite supportive in terms of compliances because I don't think they want to deal with the stress that would come with non-compliances, and the cost of non-compliance is always very high. So we are quite focused on, governance around data privacy and of course compliances. So never had those kind of challenges, Albinder.
Oh, great to hear that. So I think it is shifting where people are not questioning compliance as much. I've seen a shift in 10 years. So you're absolutely right. Coming back to you, Nikunj, foreign companies. So obviously you are a company which has a headquarters outside India. Question is, do you see key challenges for foreign companies to conduct business in India under the new privacy regime? Are there any things which concern you with the new bill? Is there any clash with GDPR? Because I have seen that in whistleblowing previously. You have a global multinational managing whistleblowing outside India. India has this rule that you must have whistleblowing in India. There's always this conflict. Auditor is not given access to the external whistleblowers, but you have to comply with the Indian law. Do you see any of that stuff in data privacy happening as the new bill comes out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, let me start from here. Okay, so what we see from the earlier committee and now with JPJ recommendation as well. So as far as the bill is concerned, the way I see it is we have started with GDPR, and now eventually with with this new recommendations and all, we have our own version of the bill. So which is therefore a combination of many other things as well, and therefore that is not certainly GDPR like bill, correct? So therefore we have India specific requirements as well, which is getting added into both the committee and this recommendation as well. And therefore it creates some of the topics which are challenging topic, and as you rightly mentioned, which are not like GDPR, and that creates a challenge for many companies, foreign companies especially. Yeah, and I think similar is the case for even US companies as well, right? And the challenges here are the same. So the basic primary concern for foreign companies, the way I see it is inclusion of non-personal data, first of all. Yeah, and obviously the restriction on cross-border data transfers and the processes or the bureaucratic processes proposed. Yeah, and the data localization obligation, certainly I think that's number one out of all. And this small topics like this mandatory hardware or IoT or AI software certification and things like that. Now, all these things are something this way or the other way creates challenges. The challenge against, first of all, if I start with, let's say, data localization, that is that it will increase definitely the cost of business. And one of the report I was reading some time back was saying that the data localization procedure that increased the cost of hosting the data by roughly around 30 to 60%. Yeah, at the business level, because centralized data storage and processing is possible online due to cloud computing's economies of scale and then seamless global internet. Yeah. When the government dismantles this, the cost of conducting business and compliance increases enormously. Yeah, so increased expenses, bar market entry for startup, and operating in unit economies and EBIT, stifling innovation and lowering long-term competitiveness. Now, the government approval requirement for transfer of SPD has been seen as an issue by many startup led. With respect to cross-border data transfer, sensitive personal data, which includes basically financials, health, and biometric data, could be sent outside India under a contract or intra-group scheme, which is to be approved by Data Privacy Authority, Data Protection Authority. Now, this is similar. This is a familiar mechanism internationally as well, and even significant number of cross-border data flows are enabled under standard contractual clauses, which normally data regulators approve, right? The recent JPC recommendation has added one additional gate to this channel and required that no such contracts or intra-group schemes be approved where the objective of data transfer is against public policy or state policy. In essence, this means DPA cannot prescribe or approve any standard clauses for scheme, and that it will need to look at the objective of each set of data transfer before approving it from time to time. Alternatively, DPA could indicate that a particular set of transfer, even when they were done under standard clauses, stands invalidated because they were found to be violate of public policy or state policy. Either way, it adds element of uncertainty and subjectivity, and therefore it also creates a specter of case by case approval, which may definitely result in delays or post facto penalties, which can create business disruption. So these are broadly, I think, the data localization, cross-border, data transfer. These are definitely the challenging areas for even, especially for foreign companies, which definitely will add to the cost of conducting business here. Forget about the implications of what India may have eventually, but clearly these are the challenges, and one need to look at it slightly differently than they are used to look at from a foreign business point of view.
Okay. So coming back to the same question about non-personal data included in the new bill. So if you can, don't mind, Sonal, if you can go into a little bit more detail on, will you have to restructure the data architecture in India for dealing with non-personal data? I know it's very contentious. If you want to add some more additional points on that.
Yeah. I would have been happy had we first focused on personal data protection law and then enhanced it, as opposed to now really expanding the scope, and kind of digressing from what we're trying to do. But anyway, it's a good thing if it, as and when it happens, but there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of what it's going to entail. But I guess to answer your question, the data privacy framework would now need to be extended to non-personal data, right? It should be a non-personal data governance framework, and it should provide for data principles consent, because before the data can be anonymized. I think the most onerous part is this is threat of criminal liability if there's a threat of de-anonymization, right? So I think the organizations need to be absolutely clear if they are in this space where they are collecting non-personal data as well, in terms of whether they are adhering to consent norms, whether they have adequate tech or measures from an anonymity standpoint. If there's an element of de-anonymization, then they need to mitigate that because they'll be exposed. So it requires a lot of rework, a lot of strategic thinking. Parties within the organization, business, lawyers, finance function, they all need to collaborate, come up with a framework, because it cannot be taken lightly if there's going to be a law on on this topic. So a lot of rework, to answer your question.
Okay. And any comments on this whole data localization point, which I think Nikunj, he started with it was the second point, then he said, no, that's the most critical. So any comments on that?
It is a most controversial topic. I'm just going to give my 2 cents in my personal capacity. And we are still awaiting clarity in terms of what that critical data is going to be. But in terms of data localization, I believe organizations should ensure that they comply with the expectations, because they cannot not comply, and B, I think from a data subject standpoint, when we decide to, I think the objective is also for the government to access, right, basis whatever the sovereignty and integrity and security of state, etc. But it is important that if you were to keep a copy or localize, keep the data here, then do you really give broad access to the governmental authorities is something that you need to be wary of, because you cannot at any point compromise with the data subjects protection, right? Trust, as we started our conversation with. And I think it's important to invest in effort to reconcile with conflicting provisions across the globe, because we are talking about global companies, right? Europe is extremely stringent. US is coming up with a lot of enactments after CCPA. Now they're extending into other regime as well. So it cannot be so that you comply with data localization norms here, and then on the other hand, you have some conflicting regulations that you need to comply with. So reconciliation vis-a-vis that, to put it in a very simplistic manner, I don't think you can escape some of the local requirements, even if you don't like it. Let's see, there'll be a lot of debate and conversations, but if it does get mandated, I guess companies need to comply with it, is what I would say.
No, I fully agree with you, because I was doing an investigation once and the company didn't have emails beyond 2 years. And they said there's no law which requires us in India to keep emails for a certain period, because there's no law, right? You can keep it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So maybe that was a smart strategy considering the tax rates happening nowadays, that you have no emails beyond 2 years. But the fact is, the government got really upset and they thought it was a destruction of evidence. So they took a very harsh stand with that company, and I'm aware of. So I think, to be fair to them also, whether it's India or US or European regulators, they always ask for data, and everybody wants that. And I know, because I was working on a cross-border investigation where the US regulator was not getting data from a European company, nothing to do with India, because they said because of GDPR, we can't send you the data. We'll redact it. But when you start redacting information, then there's nothing left, right? Because pretty much you have 100 pieces of documents and you are lawyers. I'm just an educated lawyer. I've never practiced, but you have everything blacked out. And there's no point if you have a document like that. So I think it's quite a controversial discussion for us. There's one interesting question which has come in the chat, if I can put that to you, Nikunj. This work from home environment, so somebody's asking, let's say if they have dual employment. I don't know if that will be allowed someday, but I know that's a big issue, right? In work from home where people have 2 jobs. But if a person has dual employment, are there any thoughts about that, or are there any nuances around data privacy when a person is working from home? Has there been any discussion in your organization around this whole work from home environment?
Yeah. So certainly, I think that's the apt question to ask, because many of the companies are following almost the same similar challenges here. What we have seen in last almost 2 years is that over a period of time, after initial 5-6 months, people started realizing that this is a long-term working from home, and it's not a momentarily kind of a thing. You need to work. Having said that, that also in itself posed a lot of challenges, right? Because, for example, someone need to take a printout. How would they take a printout? Yeah, there is no clearly defined processes in any companies at that point in time to say that you go there and take a printout, which essentially means, and that's how people used to kind of manage. They were using this data or whatever the data company had, kind of end up sharing in their personal email ID, or let's say that printer's personal email ID, which means it's going out of their secured environment. Right, that creates definitely a lot of challenges, and essentially that's a data leak, right? Whether you call it or not, but that's a data leak. Now, in those kind of situation, and there are a couple of questions. The first one is, how do you manage this kind of situation? What kind of precautions you take? But having said that, over a period of time, organizations they've realized that this anyways is not a momentary situation, and therefore we need to have some sort of solution to it. Now, as I given an example printer kind of situation, you can easily have a solution, right? But at the same time, when you have a topics like, a field officer wants to go out and just want to take printout, even though he may have an iPad with him or laptop with him, it's all about how you are comfortable dealing with the different details. So somebody likes printout, somebody likes screen, yeah. So all those kind of situation, and then takes a printout and things like that. So that definitely creates a different challenge. So therefore, obviously, companies have, especially even within Bayer also, we have deployed a technology basically, wherein in short, it gets first of all tracked at a global level. Then that at that time, at least we know what's happening. But at the same time, creating awareness at a local level. And the third and the most important is that, this soft filters. So when you send email outside your system, that's where soft reminder comes to you, or the soft disclaimer comes to you that this is what you are doing. Now, this kind of let's say measures, these companies are putting into the place. Now, coming to the dual employment topic, clearly, I think that's a big topic for any HR to handle, and we have seen so many examples like this very recently, right? And especially if I link it to the personal data, that's a mess. That's clearly a mess, right? We really don't know who has the data, who is working from whom. So these kind of let's say situation definitely poses challenges, but organizations eventually have started taking a steps or improving their processes, wherein by process this opportunity of dual employment doesn't exist. Now, if the question is, for example, is it really working fine? Answer is no. But at least people know that something like this happens, and that's where you have the additional antenna rose up and see that what's happening. So this is how broadly I see this topics of, let's say, dual employment as well as this data leaks.
So I'd like to put a question to both Sonal, you and Nikunj. We see a lot of investigations where a company is investigating where the data is taken by an employee who's currently on notice period, and he copies it on his hard drive and he takes it outside the company. Sometimes people take it seriously, sometimes people don't take it seriously. Honestly, that's my view, even with multinationals. Second, I've seen where while doing that investigation, you find that actually there's a lot of third-party data from other companies which are also come into your system. So any views you have on that? Should we as a country start taking, in the corporate world, start taking that very seriously and zero tolerance and taking one action? Because I've not seen consistency of action across companies. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, of course, you need to take it seriously because, we're talking about information. It's not just about, PII or SPI. It's about the confidential information, right? Which would be business sensitive, would have a competitive advantage for a company if it's being brought by the employee to his or her new employer. So I think it's important, and I think most of the companies have this included in their policy, the code of conduct policies, that you cannot bring any third party information when you join the company. So those kind of expectation setting is extremely important. Second is you need to have, and there are a lot of DLPs and other solutions, you need to have preventive and detective measures implemented with the usage of tools to really mitigate the exposure. And third is, yes, there has to be consistency across the board with organizations in all industries for that matter, because you're dealing with someone's confidential information. You cannot take it lightly. It may be of a low value, but it still has some value attached for that organization, be it your organization or someone else's organization. So my view is we should have zero tolerance vis-a-vis this, and I think we should set the culture of compliance.
Because I remember, not specific to Bayer, Nikunj, so nothing personal, but in life science, I see that a lot with doctors now. That doctor took so much money and he's flogging that drug. We also should pay him something, and then he will also sell our drug. So there's a lot of information your sales team also gives you, which sometimes becomes potentially a problem, right, from a privacy perspective, because salespeople use this as competitor intelligence, which sometimes can get into a very shady area. I remember banking industry a long time back, for doing KYC, you to check income tax return. How can you check my income tax return, right, to do a KYC? But even today, bank say, "Aapka humne income tax return check kar liya," or we've checked your income tax return. How the hell do they get my income tax return? So I guess there's a lot to do in the country, right? Also because there's a lot of practices which are just assumed that they're okay, but may not be okay. And you can see it in the poll, right? 94% of the people are saying that India's data privacy policy are really not up to the mark. Obviously, our bill has not yet been improved, but I think there's a lot more to do, I think, right now. Just coming to the next question, going to, pivoting a bit. What about minors? There was a discussion earlier, Sonal, you and Nikunj had mentioned that the law now provides for data and how personal data for minors can be retained or protected, and what should be done, do's and don'ts. So let's start with you, Sonal. Any approach that you've seen that companies can adopt for protecting minors' personal data? and allowing them to benefit of online services, for instance. I know I have a minor daughter and she checks Instagram all the time. If I dare to stop her, there'll be hell in my house. So can you please guide me and everybody else?
Yeah, I think this has become the most sensitive topic, right? Because minors are exposed to the digital world all the time. And I think they are well aware also because they have that kind of exposure. So you really can't stop them in entirety. All of us can try, but it doesn't work. But to answer your question, it depends on the nature of your business. So if I am in if I'm a gaming company, right, or if I'm in the edtech space where I do have access to minors data, I need to have additional stringent mechanisms in place in terms of, do I have the parental consent involved? Am I involved in any targeted advertising, right? Those things cannot be tolerated. So I think a lot of governance, enhanced governance, is of utmost importance in dealing with that, is what I would say. It cannot be that you have an account created and you kind of uh, really enhance the data processing. I think it's important to have those checks and balances vis-a-vis minors data.
So thanks for that, Sonal. So Nikunj, the law, I understand the draft law basically says you have to do an age verification mechanism.
Yeah.
And you have parental consent of users under the age of 18. Question is there I mean, I don't even know that. Is there a gap? Like, is it 16 to 18 or is it anybody below 18? So can my 5-year-old see the same that my 16-year-old can see, right or wrong? And my second question is age verification totally based on trust. That means if my kid says she's 18 plus, that you have to take that on the face of it, or do you check her Aadhaar card and do a verification with the Aadhaar database to say, is she actually minor or not a minor? So just some practical realities, if Nikunj, you can share, and I would love to hear from after that from Sonal, you also.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly the issue is right now, Arpinder, as far as this age verification mechanism is concerned. Now, but before that, taking your first question about the age of majority, basically what anyways the data protection bill says is 18 years only, and we haven't made that differentiation as global regulations have made it between 13 to 16 to 18. Yeah. So for us, it's very clear. So JPG clearly has retained this threshold for an individual to provide lawful consent, and this age restriction at 18, according to me, likely links to Indian contract law, which bars minors from entering into any contract without parental guidance. Having said that, as I said, it's a little different than the global standard. And the JPC recommended that data fiduciary dealing with exclusively for this minors data. First of all, they need to register, as Sonal mentioned, verify the age of child, and then obtain consent of the child's parent or guardian. Now, while so clearly, if I look at it broadly, this is like a traditional approach, according to me, to say that when, for example, some kid want to go to a movie theater to watch a A-rated movie, right? The security guard or the ticket checker would stop him that you can't go inside. So this is actually a layer created at the gate that if you want to come here, you can't come if you are beyond 18 and so. So this is the similar situation that we see it here coming also in this law, and that's also true everywhere else as well, right? And clearly this is all digital, so therefore clearly there are a lot of challenges as well, right? In physical scheme of words, it may work really well, but because it's digital, we have different challenges popping up, and that's exactly the challenge is what you have just mentioned. So this specific process of age verification is not yet prescribed. Clearly, there will certainly be challenges in its implementation. For example, as you mentioned, this age verification mechanism may require submission of some identity proof or some sort of sensitive data. So the one approach can be that you just click on it saying that I'm above 18 or below 18, whatever. But the another approach is to have a robust database with you to say that XYZ person was not below the age of 18. Now this is where clearly one need to submit this age verification document, which in our case is Aadhaar, And as far as Aadhaar is concerned, we have clear judgment coming up from Supreme Court as well, right? So it's all linked in that sense, and that creates definitely additional challenges, right? That is one. The second, even those data as well need to be secured online safely. The database, whatever you have obtained, the Aadhaar or something else, that also need to be secured. And there could be, security concerns around this, and business will need to demonstrate that adequate safety measures to consumers in order to gain trust. And there need to be a clear guidance on how such data can be disposed or used eventually. Yeah. There have been many instances of online data breaches in the past, which could weigh on the minds of any parents or guardian of a child. Yeah. So that is the, as far as the age verification is concerned. We have also seen that in past, for example, in UK, they have tried this age verification nationwide system online, which eventually they had to abandon in 2019, and they are thinking slightly differently nowadays. But this is not clearly a tried and tested method, but that's a traditional method, and I think that's where that calls for additional data, and therefore system in a way has to be designed like that.
But could it be Nikunj and Sonal, more to your point, you go to a bar and the person at the bartender, as Nikunj said, asks you for your driver's license, right? Then tomorrow, if the police raids that bar, they will hold the owner responsible if they are minors drinking alcohol and have been served alcohol. So could there be a serious issue where some of these gaming companies or online companies in India are tomorrow held responsible for hiring minors and not doing more than just relying on a trust-based verification system?
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
it's a legal issue here, actually.
Absolutely. I think, we are talking about children, and I guess, the bill could have thrown some more light in terms of categorization when we talk about, minors data, whether it's infant, whether it's, the next stages, right? But to answer your question, I think I have a slightly different point of view here. When we talk about someone going for a movie versus, and trying to, fake it or whatever, versus someone trusting the organization, right? So if a child wants to create an account, there are multiple games, Minecraft, etc., right?
Rummy.com.
Yeah, Rummy.com. But I think what is important is when a minor creates an account which is permissible, vis-a-vis the business model of the organization should definitely corroborate the data, before allowing usage or access, or before creating that account. We should have organizations store that data separately with enhanced security measures, with the highest level of privacy and access controls and protective measures. And let's not, the organization should ensure that they do not target, they do not make the minors vulnerable, because we're talking about children, right? So monitoring, you cannot go data minimization, and Nikunj gave that example of UK, right? I think I don't know if he was referring to the same one, but in the UK, I guess one of the school wanted to have biometric or other, or tech-enabled mechanisms to capture, I think some facial recognition technologies to be implemented. It was stopped because if you can allow the child with an ID card, you don't have to collect information beyond that, right? So focus on data minimization, ensure that the child is not subjected to targeted advertising, which I spoke about. You are not using the information for data subject profiling or tracking their behavior. So there could be a lot of business models which involves this gaming industry and similar industry, but organizations should be extremely careful in terms of usage of the data, because I think this goes beyond just having your data privacy framework. It's about really respecting and protecting the minors. That's how I would put it.
Well, very fair point there, Sonal. But unfortunately, you have a whole advent of smartphones, right? Every kid has it today. And again, there's a debate about security and giving the smartphone or not, So it's a lot of debates which can go on for another 3-4 hours. One question which has come in the chat panel is there an ideal period to keep emails? Because a lot of the data privacy rotates around emails, right? And some personal information collected on emails. Do you, Sonal or Nikunj, have any best practices? Do you keep all emails from day one? You keep a certain period. Any thoughts on that or guidance to someone who put that question up?
I would go with the data retention strategy that would be defined at the org level and adhere to that.
Okay, thanks. Nikunj, yours?
Yeah. Similar, Arpinder. So we have, and let's say, life cycle of this data, which also includes, emails as well. And we go ahead with that, and only obviously certainly keeping in mind the local legal requirement as well.
So I have a slightly different point of view on being an accountant. I would go with the books and records view. That means whatever time period you're allowed, you're mandated by the law to keep your books and records. That's just a safe period you should keep your emails for also, because tomorrow they can say emails are technique. There's some law judgments. I'm not the lawyer here, but I believe emails can be treated as books and records. So technically that's a safe thing. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
You can debate it both ways, but at least all my clients, I say, the tax law tells you 8 years or 7 years or whatever it is, you should keep your emails for as much of that period. It's just safer. So that would be just my advice. Now coming to
data retention policy would weigh in the regulatory aspects as well.
Right.
Absolutely. The second thing I'll have, Sonal, for you and Nikunj is there any government institution already identified who enforces or will enforce data protection law? And should there be a report on leakage which has to be reported to the police, cyber cell, or file a lawsuit? So is there anything which the draft law is prescribing, or is there anything even as of today which you have to do around that? So any advice, Nikunj or Sonal, to the people in the chat?
We are awaiting, of course, you have an obligation to notify any breach within 72 hours, right? You should have incident management. I mean, I don't think all of us should wait for the law to get enacted. I think even otherwise, God forbid, if there's an incident, you should have internal protocols in place to adhere to, basic hygiene vis-a-vis, handling those incidents. But we all are waiting for the DPA to be established. So let's see as and when that happens. And of course, you have certain obligations under the IT Act also, and you do have SPDI rules. So I would just say that follow the best practices vis-a-vis GDPR to the extent you could. Have some robust mechanism vis-a-vis IT Act and SPDI rules, and wait for the DPA, which is going to be a long drawn process, I guess.
Yeah, and just to add to Sonal what you said, and I totally agree with what you said. Even we need not wait for this bill to become then act and then gets applicable, because even our existing IT Act framework and the rules made thereunder clearly address this topic anyways, right? So anyways, we are in a way today also we need to highlight this data leaks as well as it happens. Now it's not clear implementation as we see, and that's because of the awareness, as also the internal systems within many organizations are not that robust, as Sonal rightly mentioned about incident management and all. So therefore, in practical sense, one would come to know about data leaks only after, let's say, 1 month or 2 months or whatever, right? Obviously, now this new bill brings a lot of clarity as to as to the timeline and to what kind of data and how you handle and things like that. That definitely gives us way forward to see that how it will look like, and then clearly organizations would go ahead and do that. But certainly agrees on with your point. I mean, if you want to start something on that topic, if you don't have already, today is the time, not to wait for the bill to become act.
I fully agree with Sonal and Nikunj, your point. Just 1 or 2 points to add to it would be, there is certain. So for all of you on the call, you have to report any cyber incident, as Sonal correctly said, within a time period to them. I've seen a lot of companies don't do that because they're trying to protect their reputation by saying that if we report it, people will think we don't have good controls and it will impact our business. That's totally a wrong thing in my mind, because tomorrow, if it does hit the media, you've violated the law. Number 2, you're anyway going to get your reputation tarnished because you didn't do it. Third is they can actually help you in investigating the case because they have access to information which you will never have, considering that. And lastly, I would say, we've seen a lot of cases on ransomware, Nikunj and Sonal. And a lot of companies are actually discussing how to pay Bitcoin. So they are asking us, what is the legal opinion to transfer Bitcoins to the hacker so that our computer system comes back on? So many discussions we're having nowadays around this. And there are people who call themselves ethical hackers. That means they actually send you an email which says, and I'm telling you, I've seen quite a few of them recently, where they say that we know your system has been hacked. Here is the data. We are only doing it out of the goodness of our heart so that you can fix your system. If you do not fix your system, we will report it to the authorities. And number two, for doing a good thing and actually working free of cost for you and identifying your weaknesses, you please pay us a few bitcoins as a reward, not as a ransom, but as a reward. So, I mean, there's so much of that happening. I don't know if you face that, or how can you build rules around that? Any thoughts around that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a real.
so I can go first on this. I guess, Arpinder, all the organizations have become extremely vulnerable, I think because of pandemic and now because of what's happening in Ukraine also, right? Unfortunately. So a lot of organizations have started taking proactive measures in terms of having a plan on dealing with an incident, ransomware incident, because if you're in services industry, then, you are jeopardizing the interests of your clients as well, right? So, having a framework or maybe a pillars identified in terms of how would you go about it? Do you have a external PR agency, established, right, engaged? Do you have the draft notifications vis-a-vis data subject ready, right? I mean, just a bit of groundwork so you're not reactive. And when that thing happens, you're totally cut off. Do you have alternate email IDs established, right? Because how would you communicate when your systems are down, right? Have you ensured that your insurance products are aligned to, covering you broadly to the extent you could, right? Do you have tie-ups with companies who can manage the negotiations? Because, just imagine if the entire data is in the hands of the bad actor, you can't let the data go because it may involve data of the client. So I think doing the groundwork, of course, it should never happen to anybody, but doing the groundwork is extremely important from a risk mitigation standpoint.
No, Sonal, very well put. Thank you so much for that. Very well articulated. Nikunj, from your side?
Yeah, so we certainly, I think from a global standpoint, we do have, let's say, dedicated function on this specifically to look at the incident management piece of it, mainly from a data security IT landscape, which is what clearly takes care of one about the issue reporting and the data leaks kind of a situation. Number two, with respect to what should happen, which is more to do about the management of that particular incident and how you manage that topic. That particular topic, as far as the IT landscape is concerned, we have a clearly laid out policy at a global level to say that what happens if something like that happens, what are the things, 1, 2, 3, 4 things we would do. And certainly that takes care of the points, Sonal, as you mentioned. And I think this was also a discussion some time ago, I think few years ago in that sense, to see that whether our insurance coverage covers all those risks in the first place. I mean, we have advantage of one of our let's say at a global level insurance coverage company, they do cover this kind of risks as well. So which is what obviously, as Sonal rightly you highlighted out, this point number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you need to list it down into the policy and see that how would you manage eventually when it happens. And then obviously one is to have a policy, and then second is to create awareness of it, which is where even from a global standpoint, we have in each and every country identified manager for this the data security, which is what then creates awareness at a local level. This is how normally it works in our
And there's also additional compliance on companies now. You cannot be dealing or paying or settling with folks who are in sanctioned nations, right? This is OFAC compliance. So
yes,
yeah, it's which is of course for the right reasons, but
that's why you're brokers in India, to help you, Sonal. So I think this has been a great discussion. I loved Sonal and Nikunj's checklist. I think how she articulated all those points, I think they're lovely. Actually, I took a note of them. I'm going to sell it to my next client. And hopefully, Sonal, you won't mind my taking credit for it. But I think great points. I'd like to end with the last question. So Sonal and Nikunj, I mean, these millennials and zennials or whatever, these, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, they are so possessive of their privacy. In fact, recently, there was an inquiry I was dealing in a client, and the youngster there said, that's my personal data. I'm not going to share it with you. And I wasn't talking about, cell phones, etc., which are debatable. I'm talking about the computer itself. And we had shown him some personal email from his computer and there was a bank statement on his official computer, which we all take the view, right? It's an official computer. You've signed the policy. Everything on the computer now is mine. But he or she, I won't give the gender, made such a big hue and cry, wrote a letter, went to the police station, filed a case. There was such a drama. So the fact is that, do you find that we'll struggle actually to comply because they treasure their privacy a lot more? And when we're doing compliance work, investigations, it's going to get more and more difficult because we'll have no data to work off. Because people have, one, become more knowledgeable. Number two, it is their privacy. To be fair, you have to respect that. But it's just going to make compliance people's lives more difficult because we can't even confront a suspect with black and white evidence because of data privacy concerns. If I show the suspect a bank statement, he or she can actually file a case against me.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that?
Okay, if I can go first, Sonal. Yeah. So clearly, I think this is what we had a quick discussion. I think in the first session, if I'm not wrong, right? And if I compare it with the traditional ways of handling, is that we have always been kind of open in sharing a lot of details, which now comes into the sensitive personal data information, correct? And we have also systems like that as well, wherein you need to share the data. You don't really have an option most of the time. Yeah. Having said that, with millennials and zillennials coming, clearly, as you rightly highlighted, their expectation is very, very clear. These are not the generations to whom you need to tell what are your rights, because they know, right? They know that what their rights are. But at the same time, this is the same generation, they just want to even trade off, they just want to share the data and get something in return as well. So they are flexible in that sense, if I see, yeah. But the fundamental point remains very clearly is that they demand transparency. So it's a human right to know what information companies are holding about them and why. And then if I make a choice, I'm fine. But you can't, take me for granted. And that's clearly the expectation coming up, right? As we see new generations joining the organization, which essentially, the way I look at it is calls about the transparency, the way in which you handle the compliances piece. At the same time, this low requirement of privacy designs and things like that, wherein one makes an informed decision that this is the purpose for which data is being collected. This is where the data will travel. And here is the time frame I can go back to organization and request them that now you delete. If we do that, I think perhaps we are handling the expectations very clearly, which is also the intent of the law, according to me. Yeah. So essentially, to me, this leads to the core data privacy law and clearly demands much needed transparency in privacy by design. And obviously, this demands for standards above and beyond what's required legally. This is what clearly the expectation is, and I think then will come. Obviously, on the way, we will have this transition from this traditional to the new expectation, and that's where we definitely may see a lot of challenges on the way. So I think this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nikunj. Sonal, you want to give the last end of this panel?
Sure. So I think privacy by design, which is the core of doing business, should be adopted comprehensively in the organizations. Nikunj rightly alluded to that. If you address that, then you'll focus on you'll end up pseudonymizing the data, right? That will mitigate or address a lot of concerns of millennials and zillennials, making them aware, focusing on privacy notices, making them aware, and again, going back to the transparency principle, ensuring that you're transparent and you also focus on data minimization and just don't apply a broad brush is something which I would want organizations to note. And I guess they're absolutely right in protecting their rights, and law is also getting there. But I think organizations should ensure that they instill privacy by design at its core. So then a lot of things would fall in place, and of course with the other elements that I discussed. But it's challenging times ahead for businesses who liaise or interact with that generation.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Sonal and Nikunj. You've been great people on the panel. You've been really helpful. I think last thing I'll just like to add to everybody is everyone's talked about complicated things. I recommend to all clients, please look at your IT policy as of today. Just make sure it is comprehensive, because even today I see such weak IT policies in companies which are gray, causes a lot of chaos at a later date. So, but that's it from our side. Thank you so much for being great listeners. I'll pass it over to Aarti and Hemal, and you can take it forward.
Thank you so